Faker isn't happy. Last week, he called out a Chinese pro player for inting one of his solo queue games, and now that player has been punished hard. Faker has said that if this kind of behavior continues, he's going to boycott solo queue. Now, I'm sure we've all said that after a 10-game loss streak, but Riot are taking Faker's concerns a lot more seriously. This morning I looked at our subscriber count and noticed we're really close to 2 million subscribers now. So if you still haven't subscribed, please do so, like the video, and just have a really nice day. Yeah. Last week, the GOAT to end all GOATs, Faker, was having a really rough game on stream. His top laner, Aatrox, was 0-8 and was refusing to listen to his teammates. In other words, he was kind of running it down. Reddit user Moonmeh translated Faker's comments, saying Faker was complaining about the player and said that he would report him after the game. We've all been there, right? Sometimes you just get an inter in one of your games, but this time things were slightly different. After the game, Faker found out that it wasn't just a random troll. His inting top laner was Xingtian, the substitute top laner for Chinese pro team Top Esports. Faker then went on to complain about Chinese pros being given super accounts to play on the Korean server, and that if this kind of thing happened again, he would boycott solo queue until Riot fixed things. So this is pretty nuts. Obviously, if I threatened to stop playing solo queue because people were inting my games, nobody would give a Even I wouldn't give a But Faker is, of course, a whole different beast, and so this has gained a lot of attention. Xingtian took to Weibo to apologize for his behavior in the game, saying it was a mistake and that he will accept all punishments from the league and the team. And we didn't have to wait long to see what those punishments were. Top Esports put out a statement, translated by Reddit user Fariko Grim, which said that they had spoken to Xingtian about his behavior, that they would be cooperating with the league in their investigation, and that based on the rules, they'd be deducting 1 month's salary from him as punishment. On Twitter, iCrystallization also added that the LPL had fined Xingtian a little over $7,900, banned him from the next 2 competitive matches, and said that he'd been suspended from using a Korean account until the end of the year. Now, this isn't the first time we've seen LPL players being punished through their wallets. Last year, we reported that V5 player PZX was fined for accidentally taking teleport instead of smite in a pro game. The year before, famous jungler SOFM was given the same punishment for going AFK in a solo queue game. What's not so common, of course, are these kinds of punishments happening because of accusations made by someone outside of China, by Faker himself no less. Although many have sympathized with Faker's frustrations, his comments did rub some people up the wrong way. He was accused of racism for seemingly targeting Chinese pros when this kind of thing happens all over the world. And the Korean server has long been known to have its fair share of griefers who just give up after an early setback. Some felt it was wrong to single out Chinese players, but others defended Faker, saying that his frustrations lay only with the specific pros who int, not Chinese players or pros in general. Now, this whole situation kind of reminded me of a story I covered at the end of 2020, when Faker and other Korean pros were having their games inted for Chinese gambling sites. The thing is, the teammates of those pro players are being contacted by the bettors to intentionally throw their games. The players win big and the bettors win even more. Believe it or not, people are being paid to throw Faker's games on stream. In an effort to stop that gambling, Riot Korea announced they'd inspected 10,000 accounts and suspended the ones they suspected of being used overseas. Now, obviously, that's not what's happening here. Nobody is accusing Xingtian of throwing Faker's game for a gambling site. But this incident is another example of friction between the Chinese and Korean servers, and some people are wondering why Chinese players, pro or otherwise, are able to play on the Korean server in the first place. The answer is super accounts, special accounts given to pro players by Riot. This is a common thing in regions around the world, but especially so in Korea, whose high ELO games are famously of a much higher quality than other regions. Chinese pros will play on the Korean server for this very reason, to get proper practice. I Will Dominate pointed out on Twitter that 4 of the top 5 accounts on the Korean server are owned by Chinese pro players. In a statement to a Korean Korean media outlet, translated by AFK Gaming, Riot Korea reportedly said the current state of affairs is that super accounts are given to all pro players who have signed a pledge/contract. This doesn't just apply to Chinese pro players, but pro players of other overseas regions as well. So it is difficult to consider this matter solely from the perspective of the Korean office/region. They also reported that Faker has been talking to the LCK Secretariat about the situation. It's obvious that Faker is just sick to the back teeth of having his solo queue games griefed. Sure, Faker isn't raging on stream or smashing up his keyboard, but as I mentioned earlier in the video, he said that if this kind of thing keeps happening, he's gonna boycott solo queue. Now, this isn't great. It's not great for Faker, of course, but it's not a great look for Riot either. The League of Legends GOAT is publicly saying that his experience with the game is so bad, he might just not play solo queue. So, can Riot make solo queue a playable experience for Faker once again? Well, some have suggested Korea having its own version of North America's Champions Queue, an isolated invite-only server for pro players and highly ranked players. Now, that may help with gambling sites and people throwing his games for that, but it's not going to stop a pro from running it down like in this situation. Riot's in a tough spot here. Perhaps that's why the LPL has come down so hard on Xingtian. A 2-match ban seems fair. A month's salary deducted is pretty steep, but banning him from Korean solo queue until the end of the year? Ouch. Some people feel like he's being made an example of. A warning from Riot that perhaps now more than ever, griefing high ELO games like Faker's will not go unpunished. I don't think Faker would have wanted this guy to get punished this hard, right? Like I think he was more generally complaining about the situation or what he sees as like a trend. Yeah, it does seem quite steep for this guy, but like I say, I mean, perhaps he's just being made an example of because it's difficult to combat this, right? It's almost like you have to be preventative. You have to stop people from even thinking about doing it, because how can you really implement a system where you stop this from happening when it's like pro players who are doing it, right? You have to like scare them essentially.